Wes Huff and Gavin Ortlund have just responded to their critics about the conversation surrounding the Great Isaiah Scroll, the Masoretic text, the similarity between the two, and you've got to see this. I'm going to try to do very little talking in this video, and I know that's very exciting for a lot of you who tell me I should talk less, and I will definitely talk less in this video because there's a lot of information to get through. Also, I'm going to be playing the videos at 1.5 speed just for the sake of time, so if you want to watch it slower when I start a video, just do it like at 0.75 or something like that. I'm going to go back and forth, but Wes Huff and Gavin Ortlund have done some response videos. Wes Huff had a scholar on about this stuff, and both of these were very great videos. I'll link them in the description below. Very much worth the watch.
There's some subjectivity in where you cut off orthography from textual variants. But
this is going to be a big theme, by the way. That 92%, 93% number that Dan McClellan and others are giving of similarity is an impressive number, and I'll show you some clips about that throughout this video. But the first thing I want to show you is that is a very subjective number. Deciding what's really an issue and what is not really an issue is a very subjective thing to do.
But these textual variants are tiny matters. They're minuscule in the majority of cases. Okay, it could be a different name, form of a name, like the name Hezekiah we'll talk about. It might be a different verb tense that doesn't even register in an English translation because Hebrew verb tenses work differently and you wouldn't even notice it reading the Bible through in English. It might be a difference of word order. It might be little tiny errors like adding a letter or omitting a letter or something like this that doesn't affect meaning and is not discernible in translation. Just work through what Dan had counted to be 1,930 textual variants, non-orthographic variants between the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic text. So
1,930 textual variants Dan McClellan counted. Again, I've already reacted to all this. You can watch my video on the whole Wes Huff saga in 12 minutes.
See here, 5 variants right here in verse 1 and 2 more in verse 2. Now, numbers 1 and 5 in yellow we can skip. Those wouldn't go into Dan's 1930 number. Those are just differences with the Septuagint. There is no difference with the Masoretic text there. Let's look at the second one in pink. Sorry for the squiggly lines here. I did this in Canva really quickly. I'm trying to film this video quickly. You'll notice a bracket there. On the left side of the bracket is a Hebrew word and then 1Q Isaiah A. That's the word listed in the Great Isaiah Scroll. On the right side of the bracket, you'll have the variant found in the Masoretic text and also in a text from Cave 4 at Qumran. Now, the word in question here is simply the Hebrew word yom, meaning day. It's in the plural, so days with a bet prefix, meaning in the days of. So if you look at either side of the bracket, you'll notice a slightly different wording, but in case it's unclear, I'll put this up on the screen so you can take a look, and you can see the additional marking put by the Great Isaiah Scroll. For whatever reason, interesting, the scribe added a vav above the word there. And I was talking with my dad about this. My dad's an Old Testament guy. Kind of fascinating to think about why he would have done that and what's the thought process there. But the point for us to see is that this doesn't affect translation. This is a tiny matter like spelling, even if you wouldn't call this orthography.
So this is one of the ones on their list, and look at how minor that is as he breaks it down. There are way more examples like this that he gives, but this is his overall point.
Or O, earth, or something like that. Now, of these 7 major differences, not one of them is listed in the footnotes of the Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia, which is a standard scholarly edition of the Hebrew Bible, which means the editors didn't even think these were worth mentioning. They don't even discuss these. They don't mention anything in the Qumran texts in Isaiah 1 until verse 8, where there's a question about whether to include a vav, meaning and, at the beginning of a word there. So if you keep going through these textual variants, you get to verse 3, and you just keep working through the book, this is what the majority of these textual variants are like.
They're not significant differences. That's the basic point that he's making. So this is Dr. Mead, who was on Wes Huff's podcast talking about this issue as well.
Are working with what Ulrich and Flint have called textual variants. Those are what I actually want to talk about now. Because again, that's the big list that folks are trying to use to arrive at, well, there's 92% verbal correspondence between 1Q Isaiah A and the Masoretic text. Well,
so they're using this work to say 92% when they counted up all the variants together and they said 92% accuracy. This is what the atheists are saying.
I'm just shocked at some of the stuff that's in that list of textual variants. Isaiah 58 verse 2, these are going to be hard to actually illustrate because the translations are going to be identical. You have a Hebrew text, Isaiah 58:2, in the Masoretic text, it would read something like this, Umishpat Elohau lo azav, which we would translate, and he or they did not forsake the justice of their God or his God. Okay, I've no English translations for whatever reason pluralize this. It's about Israel, I think, as a nation. But anyhow, and he did not forsake the justice of his God. Now, his God is pronounced Elohau, A-W. Or AYW. It's another pronominal suffix, and I'll spare you the rest of the details. When I contrast that with the Great Isaiah Scroll in this same place, the reading is this, Umishpat Eloho lo azav. The difference is Elohau, his God, and Eloho, guess what? Also meaning his God, you see. All that's
it means the same exact thing. The same exact thing. And this is what they're counting up as a difference, like a major difference.
Here is what we call a contraction of a diphthong, okay, an AW, now contracting to O. The Masoretic text actually preserves the oldest spelling, ow. The Great Isaiah Scroll, 1,000 years earlier on leather, already shows updating in this grammatical and linguistic development. Eloho, right? His God. And I'm not making this up. You can look at grammars on the language of Dead Sea Scroll Hebrew and that sort of thing. But that is simply a linguistic, phonological change in the language. But Wes, they list it as a textual variant. Okay? This is amazing to me. Okay, I don't know how many there are like that, but my guess is quite a lot because the 3ms pronominal suffix shows up a lot. And so someone's going to have to go and track all those down. And anything fun.
That's at about 33 minutes into the video, by the way. There's more examples that he gives throughout the remainder of the video. You got to go watch it. But I want to go back to the point that deciding this stuff is very subjective. Look at what he says here.
Masoretic text overall. There are some things that we need to chat about. I don't know about you, Wes. I'm not really a stats guy. I've heard a lot of stats on the Great Isaiah Scroll. And quite frankly, viewers need to know it is very, very difficult to nail this stuff down, okay?
Then he gives an example about how sometimes like software, like accordance software will take 3 words and then make it 1 word, or take 1 word rather and then make it 3 words.
Because that's a massive variance. That's a variance of almost 8 to 10,000 words right off the top, all right? So I do think that's important when we're talking about statistical analyses. Again, the Masoretes would have had a much lower count of words than accordance software. And I think that's really, really important to say up front. Because of this, I find all these numbers pretty much irrelevant. I heard that from various channels that maybe the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic text of Isaiah have something like 92% correspondence, verbal, word-for-word correspondence. Okay, 92%. Which, by the way, I don't know what you think about this. That's still pretty close, right? Like, even if that was the final number, I'm going, this is over 1,000 years of copying. Right? Remember, a lot of people have in mind that it's like the telephone game. This is how ancient manuscripts were copied, you know? Of course, the telephone game, you don't wind up with 92% alignment, right, between the original message and the final one, right? And you're not supposed to. It's supposed to be fun, right? And the game is supposed to lead to utter chaos. But that's just not the way ancient scribes work. I think we need to be clear about that. So even 92%, if that was the number, I'm still thinking to myself, wow, that's amazing alignment, actually. And
Gavin Ortlund actually gives some more receipts on this and showing, because one argument that the atheists were making is saying, like, this is standard stuff. This is not impressive. You know, Wes talked about this like it was amazing, and he emphasized it to Joe Rogan. Alex O'Connor said this like it was something amazing, but it's pretty standard, just normal stuff. Scholars weren't dazzled by this at all.
It's still just amazing and unheard of for an ancient text to be so well preserved.
But here's the thing. There's nothing special about 1Q Isaiah A or any biblical manuscripts in terms of their fidelity or how close they are to later copies of the Old Testament. You could do the same thing with manuscripts of pretty much anything from antiquity. So why are we so shocked and so excited when when biblical manuscripts basically just look like all other ancient manuscripts?
So then Gavin Ortlund shows, actually, people were very impressed by this.
We can go all the way back to the 1950s as they're first being studied. Miller Burroughs was an early authority on the Dead Sea Scrolls and a professor at Yale Divinity School. His conclusion was, it is a matter of wonder that through something like 1,000 years, the text underwent so little alteration.
A matter of wonder.
As I said in my first article on the scroll, herein lies its chief importance, supporting the fidelity of the Masoretic tradition. This is not an evangelical apologist. Here's how David Friedman, another Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, spoke of Burroughs' early work. You can read that quote on the screen. Now, as the decades have rolled forward, the picture definitely has, in some respects, gotten more complicated. These early studies didn't have access to all the Isaiah texts in the various caves. They didn't have access to digitized forms of the text that allow for electronic searches. So in a more recent work, Eugene Ulrich, who's kind of a chief authority on these questions, and definitely not an evangelical apologist, notes, so he'll talk about, there's slightly more variance, for example, in 1Q Isaiah B than the earlier reports, but it's still remarkably close to the Masoretic text.
1Q Isaiah B confirmed, as the Pentateuchal manuscripts did for the Samaritan Pentateuch, that the medieval Masoretic text of Isaiah very accurately transmits one of the ancient forms of the book, though the 161 orthographic differences and 183 textual variants between them are more numerous than originally reported.
Remarkably close to the Masoretic text. And the idea that the discovery of these scrolls is a remarkable confirmation of the prior textual transmission is still frequently observed in the scholarship. Here's how Ellis Brotzman put it: while there are many small differences between the Masoretic text and the various Qumran documents, the overall agreement between them is striking.
It is striking.
Qumran scrolls, while being much earlier than the Masoretic text, generally supported the fidelity with which the Masoretic text was copied. He's writing that in the 90s, and in context, he's agreeing explicitly with Burroughs' early assessment, and he ties this claim specifically to the book of Isaiah. Even Ulrich can speak of the impact of the Dead Sea Scrolls as showing that the traditional Hebrew Bible has been amazingly accurately preserved.
Amazingly accurately preserved. So this is actually an impressive number. They're acting like it's not, and I'm not sure why, because there are a lot of scholars from that time who say this is a very impressive number. Really not even the number, just a level of accuracy, because the number has changed so much. Here's another big moment with respect to the final number in Wes Huff's podcast with Dr. Mead here.
Okay. The lower your percentage is going to be, right, of alignment between the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic text. So qualitative analysis is going to dictate that we don't just count up every single difference. We actually have to weigh and evaluate every single textual variant and ask, what is this telling us about the textual history of this book? And so far, when you look through that long list of textual variants, you don't get the impression that the editors of that volume are interested in weighing and evaluating differences. They're simply enumerating them so that someone later down the line starts to put, fractions together and then getting percentages of like 90% or 92% or something like that. Those are grammatical or linguistic variations.
And then he gets back to this a little bit later when he talks about that phrase that was being used by Alex O'Connor a lot, scholarly consensus.
And do that in these things because scholars simply have, they're independent. They have their own minds and they actually think about these things quite independently. This is not going to work, consensus or whatever, because anytime I can show where Ulrich and Tove sort of diverge on something like this, no consensus is there, okay, at that point. So, and that's just the way these things are. There's a certain amount of subjectivity in how we parse out what's counted as a word even, then what counts as a true meaning variant, and then maybe some productive statistics could come from that, but you can see why statistics aren't going to tell a very accurate story because it all comes down to who's putting in the data, who's doing the counting, who's doing the weighing, the evaluating.
So you notice that. So think about this from a Christian's perspective. Now, he already made the argument that the number has got to be higher than 92%, just based off of some of the examples that McClellan and others have given, or like Ulbricht, for example, which is what people like McClellan have been using. When you just look at some of those examples, the number has to be higher than 92%. But even if you take the 92% number, it is so impressive. But the reality is they are nitpicking so much that the number has got to be higher than 92%. In every single aspect here, in so many aspects here, I don't want to overgeneralize. The people on the other side of this issue, you notice when you really do get into the weeds of this, and I'm thankful for Wes Huff, for Gavin Ortlund, and others for pointing this out, you really do see that they are overly nitpicking, being way too critical than what is necessary on this matter. And because of that, now, thankfully, I'm glad that they're doing that because it's being exposed by the critical analysis, let's say, from other people. But again, they're so overly critical about this. And even if I take their number like 92%, that is still absolutely amazing with the time span that you have from the Great Isaiah Scroll and the Masoretic text. It is still incredible. And so to know that the number is actually higher than that even more strengthens my faith in the reliability of Scripture. Again, this has had like the opposite effect that maybe some people thought that it would have. I'm glad, and I said this in the very beginning, I am glad that we are talking about this stuff. I'm glad that we are debating this stuff. I'm glad that the door has been opened and everyone has started shooting their guns, and now we're debating about the Dead Sea Scrolls, the reliability of the Bible, the existence of God, the resurrection of Jesus. I love so much that we are debating this stuff. Why? Because as a Christian, I am not scared of the truth. I'm glad that this debate is happening. It's only going to lead to truth, and I believe that God is right, and this has strengthened my belief in Him. It's strengthened my belief in the reliability of His Word. This has been an amazing thing. But let me know what you think about all this. Again, watch those videos. They'll be linked in the description below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon. God bless you all. I love you, and Lord willing, I will talk to you soon. Goodbye.